From 1942 to 1945, an all-American city of nearly 11,000 people blossomed in the West. Along with the library, churches, a hospital, fire department, and a swimming hole, the town had Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, basketball, baseball, and football teams. They grew and sold copious amounts of chickens and produce, and they had their own traveling band. Sons and fathers served in the military, and Gold Star mothers grieved over their sons' deaths, even as they raised money for war bonds. These modern American townsfolk were the prisoners in the internment camp at Heart Mountain, Wyoming.
We came to Vocation, Wyoming, and I thought, wow. First, I read it as Vacation, Wyoming, so I thought, wow, that's nice.
I believe it was a little scary. And I remember having to fill up bags with hay that would be our mattress.
And so when they said Wyoming, I was really excited because I thought, well, here's my opportunity to see horses and cattle and cowboys and Indians but all the way up there, we didn't see a single one.
In 1941, an event occurred that changed American families forever. The bombing of Pearl Harbor threw the U.S. into World War II and threw the lives of Japanese Americans into turmoil. Whole families were forced to leave their homes, give up their property, and move to stark, barren barracks in isolated areas of the United States. This is their story, told through the eyes of the children of Heart Mountain. It is the story of their bravery, their loyalty, and most of all, their resilience. In the 1940s, as Americans came out of the Depression, it seemed on the face of it that the Japanese immigrants who had been trickling in for a century had nearly completely assimilated into American culture.
I was born in Los Angeles, California, in Boyle Heights. My parents were American citizens. My mom was born in Hawaii.
I was born in San Francisco, California, June 13, 1932. My mother was born in Seattle, Washington, so she was an American citizen.
I was born in downtown Los Angeles, about 180 years after Los Angeles was born.
I was born in Monterey, California, 1930.
I was born February 20th, 1929, in Penryn, California, which is in Placer County in Northern California.
I was born here in San Jose, California, way back in 1930.
Well, I went to school in Loomis. It's a small town northeast of Sacramento.
I was born in Walnut Grove, California, February 4, 1931.
I was born in Portland, Oregon.
I was born in Los Angeles. I went to grade school at the Euclid Avenue Elementary School in Los Angeles.
I guess we were just kids growing up, going to school, going to Japanese school, just having fun. It was just kind of a normal life.
Something I really hated was going to a Japanese school.
Sometime I would accidentally, on purpose, miss the bus home from school so I could meander through Little Tokyo and maybe stop at, I called our reading room. It was the unusual reading room because when too many kids assembled there, they asked us to leave. That happened to be the comic book section of the drugstore there in Little Tokyo.
Well, we played football, kicked the can, Oh, we went swimming a lot because we lived right next to the Los Angeles harbor.
Then one day came the headline that would change the lives of these West Coast American children forever.
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion.
On December 7th, that Sunday, I was at downtown Broadway at a movie house, and after we came out about 2 or 3 o'clock, noticed the headlines. Japs bomb Pearl Harbor. It meant nothing to me because I didn't know what or where Pearl Harbor was.
It was a shock when I found out that we were at war with Japan. And of course, our loyalties were always with the United States of America because we were born here and we're citizens here.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Most were loyal, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move.
All of the men in our neighborhood were taken away because they were all fishermen.
Our neighbors, some of them were businessmen. They had to go. They were taken first.
My best friend was a fellow by the name of Russell. And when the war broke out, they put all the Japanese Americans interior so we couldn't see the San Francisco Bay. But one day Russell and I went hiking way up in the hills, and we climbed the summit and we looked down and I could see the entire bay and I saw all these ships. So I ducked down and Russell asked me, he says, what is wrong? I said, I'm not supposed to see the ships. I'm not supposed to look at the harbor. He said, who's going to know?
Gee, I heard a rumor there's some Japs around here at this company. And so my husband said, well, you might be surprised, but I'm one of those supposed Japs. And he was quite embarrassed. He says, oh, I didn't mean you. I didn't mean you.
On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order Number 9066, which gave the military the power to ban all people of Japanese ancestry from the entire Pacific coast.
It was probably a week or two when they told us that we're going to be leaving.
We found out that eventually we're going to have to be moved. So all of us classmates after school, we walked down to downtown Broadway, had our pictures taken, small 1-by-1 pictures, and we shared our pictures. In fact, I still have that today.
By May of that same year, Exclusion Order Number 33 was issued, which mandated that Japanese, both alien and non-alien, from Arizona to Washington, evacuate their homes with little more than the clothing on their backs.
No one is allowed to bring their pets, so that was a little bit heartbreaking.
Also, of course, parents were trying to sell everything that we possibly could sell.
Government agencies helped in 100 ways. They helped the evacuees find tenants for their farms. They helped businessmen lease, sell, or store their property. Now, this aid was financed by the government, but quick disposal of property often involved financial sacrifice for the evacuees.
One lady came in and looked at the dining room furniture, and she said, I'm not cheap, I'll pay you $40 for it. And I just was flabbergasted. I said, honey, you talk to them. I can't stand it. And so I went out of the room, and he treated them like they were his best friend, and he declined. Unfortunately, his friend bought all of the furniture at almost the cost that we paid, So we were one of the lucky ones.
Behind them, they left shops and homes they had occupied for many years.
Exclusion Order Number 33 demanded that all Japanese report to an assembly center in less than a week. They gathered mostly in churches, where they awaited their unknown fate.
We had no relatives here, but a close family friend had a restaurant business in Japanese Town, and she managed to get us over there to stay at an empty Buddhist temple so that we could register as residents of Japanese Town. And there were 3 families living in that Buddhist temple, right on First Street there.
Well, we reported to this local church, at that time was called Union Church of Los Angeles, on 120 South San Pedro Street.
And we had moved to the Japanese Union Church on San Pedro Street.
And we met at the Buchanan YMCA, and they gave us our ID tag rather, and they put us on a bus, and we went to a train station. And we were really excited because to get on a train, that was a treat.
Those were days when everything was very confusing for us. I was just 12, so I really didn't understand the impact of what's going to happen to us.
But this was only the beginning. Within days, people were herded onto buses and taken to assembly camps, many of them horse racing tracks. Tanforan Racetrack in San Francisco. In Southern California, the Santa Anita and Pomona tracks were both filled with hastily constructed barracks.
Apparently, my mother and the other 2 mothers of the 2 families living in the Buddhist temple were notified when to be at a certain corner to board the bus to be driven over to Santa Anita.
And on our bus, we had armed soldiers with fixed bayonets. And then we had a police escort to a place in Arcadia, California.
We went to Santa Anita Assembly Center in Southern California.
I lived in a barracks there that were built, and some lived in the horse stalls. They said that in summer when it got hot, they couldn't stay in there because the smell of the manure was too strong.
There was no horses. There was just families living in the horse stalls.
And that's where they built most of the barracks, right on the parking lot.
I believe it was a little scary and also kind of dirty because, you know, the living conditions were so different from in a home. And I remember having to fill up bags with hay that would be our mattress.
In isolated areas, they were told to come in their own cars. Well, most of us, we boarded buses or trucks to get here. Anyway, they came in here in their cars, and the cars were impounded in the infield of the track. And there was a bunch of cars there. They were not allowed to sell them, so they burned them.
Everyone was given a tag with a number.
I remember our family number. It was 24455. So that's been sort of imprinted.
We were allowed to bring only what we could carry, so we had to be very selective of what we brought.
Well, I don't remember what I took, but my mother was very worried. And in one hand, she had a suitcase, and in the other hand, she had a big sort of canister of dried milk because she thought we wouldn't have anything to eat.
lack of food would be the least of their worries.
Of course, there was a barbed wire fence going all the way around, and right at the corner of the camp was a guard tower, and it had searchlights that would sweep all night all across the barracks.
Yeah, we used to play hide and go seek with the lights, and every time the light would sweep by the corner of the barrack, would run across this wide street right there on District 7, run across there to the other side, and trying to get over there before the searchlights hit us.
We used to play games with these sentries at Santa Anita. I say play games because in the evening when we had to go use the latrines, the spotlights would pick us up and follow us wherever we go. So if we went into the latrine, they follow us there and waited for us to get out. So as we got out, we used to play games with them, hide behind the barracks so they couldn't follow us.
Well, as kids, we were not afraid of the guard tower. We were not afraid about the barbed wire. And the reason why is because we wanted to get close to the military police or army. And the reason why is because we want to see their guns. We want to see their dog. We want to see if they had a pistol. We want to see their ammunition. We were fascinated with their uniform and the whatever medals they had or any stripes, anything. As kids, we enjoyed that.
Even during the initial incarceration, the Japanese Americans worked for the war effort and the children went to school.
We had school on the grandstand, but school was a little bit distracting because the open grandstand, we had 30 or 40 kids clustered in the grandstand with the teachers in front of us, but the backdrop was that we could see the young men and women making camouflage nets.
They put booms up, and they would have a model pattern for the camouflage. Yeah, and then they laid another net over it, and they just copied they duplicated that pattern. And I think there was some objection. They were getting paid like 7 cents an hour.
And we were supposed to go to Tanforan, a racetrack, which was called Tanforan Assembly Camp. And when we got near Millbrae, we could see Tanforan. So we assumed that the train was going to backtrack because it was going so slow and enter Tanforan. But it kept going faster and faster. And pretty soon someone said, I think we're going to the desert. I remember seeing postcards in drugstores and whatnot. And I pictured Long Beach, where they had the Miss California pageant. I remember seeing the palm trees of Palm Springs. I remember seeing the lights of Hollywood. So it sounded like a very glamorous trip.
I was in Pomona Assembly Center. We lived where the horses lived in the stables.
We had 9 people living in this particular one room, a very small room, and we slept on the floor, but they gave us like a sheet, like a great big pillow, and we stuffed it with hay, and we slept on that. And we had 2 families living there.
My mom and dad probably tried to keep us as calm as can be.
Well, you have to remember, my parents spoke mostly Japanese. My dad spoke a little English, but my mother spoke very little English. And they didn't, I can't recall them, actually sitting down and telling us what was going to happen, but they were, I think, sort of accustomed to being told what to do in life.
We had periodic inspections of each of the rooms for, weapons.
Every Monday was
okay, once a week, right?
a shakedown day, where everything we owned we had to lay out on the macadam. And the police would come and confiscate certain things. You know, things like carpenter tools, kitchen knives, straight razors.
And my father had a sword which he gave to my brother, and they took that away. He never saw it again.
Another thing they confiscated was the electric hot plates that mothers brought to heat the baby's milk. Anyway, we had to do this every Monday, and it was we felt so demeaned and violated.
During one of these Monday inspections, one of the inspectors was accused of stealing some money from one of the barrack units and or valuables. I don't know exactly what it was. And the rumor spread like wildfire, and pretty soon there were huge mobs outside just screaming and yelling, and they went toward the gate over here.
They let us know real quickly that they were in command. I remember these half tracks that used to run up and down, and there was I think a 30 caliber machine gun mounted on it, and you could see the shiny bullets on the belt, you know, that feeds the machine gun, and they would be shining in the sun, and it was very intimidating.
Everything has changed. Nothing looks like the way it was.
Over the next few months, families and individuals were shipped out of the assembly camps to their final destinations, what the government called internment camps across the United States.
I had no idea that we were going to leave Santa Anita. All I knew was that my mother said we're moving, we were told to move rather, and of course we all packed up our things into our one suitcase again.
Well, we were very obedient. We did whatever was asked us to do.
My mama was in charge, you know, and listened to what mama did, and she told me what to do and when to do it, and I obeyed.
Now we got another train, and no one knew where we were going.
I don't know that I knew we were going to go to Wyoming. All I know is that we had to pack up again to go.
At that time, my dad was, I think, given a choice of whether he wanted to go back to Japan or stay in the U.S. And Tule Lake was a camp where if you want to go to Japan, you stayed there. But if you want to stay in the U.S., you went to other camps. And my dad didn't want to go back to Japan, so he decided to go to Heart Mountain at that time.
I grew up in the era of cowboys and Indians. And I always assumed that the Indians were real bad because when you look at the movie, they're always attacking. And so when they said Wyoming, I was really excited because I thought, well, here's my opportunity to see horses and cattle and cowboys and Indians but all the way up there, we didn't see a single one.
I knew nothing except it was maybe sagebrush country. But we did take a train from Tule Lake, and I think it went through Salt Lake up to Billings, and then it finally arrived in Heart Mountain.
All I remember is being in the train for approximately 3 days, I think.
Got to be night. And then they said, okay, you got to pull the shades down. And I didn't know why, but somebody said we were going to Las Vegas. And I don't know if that's a big secret that you're supposed to keep from us.
I remember they had us pull down all the blinds because they didn't want anyone to see us. And, you know, I don't know at that point if we were afraid because we didn't know where we were going, or we were just afraid because it was so mysterious. Why do we have to pull the blinds down and et cetera?
We could peek out, you know, kids, we were not worried about the rules and regulations.
When the train pulled into, I guess, where the camp was, I could see a sign on a post saying vocation.
We came to Vocation, Wyoming. And I thought, wow, first I read it as Vacation, Wyoming. So I thought, wow, that's nice, but big open space, looked like the middle of nowhere, just countryside. Never saw such big opening space. But then when I saw the black tar papered barracks, I thought, uh-oh, is this where we're gonna live now?
The arrival at Heart Mountain, Wyoming was a shock to the Californians.
I remember the whole area being very desolate, just sagebrush, kind of a desert kind of a surrounding with just completely emptiness. It was desolation. And here's this one mountain sticking up there, which I found out they called Heart Mountain. Yeah.
That's one of the impressions I have about Wyoming, where there was a lot of sky, and you could see Heart Mountain in the distance from the camp.
We came to Heart Mountain late at night, cold, in an open-end truck, and they told us exactly, it was real confusing for the elderly, you know, saying you're going to go to block 14, you're going to go block 20, we're going to let you off here. Don't forget, when you go to your barracks, there's no latrine, there's no running water, you have one light, and you have Army beds and Army blanket.
It was very dusty, so it was a disappointment.
We had blizzards in Heart Mountain. I mean, it was really bitterly cold compared to Thule, I think. So that was a different experience.
Probably the worst snow was the blizzard. The howling wind and the cold penetrating. And the first year, the first snow, the blizzard we had, we were not ready for it, clothes-wise.
And they issued Army surplus clothing and the Navy pea jackets. That came in handy because they were big and heavy.
But in camp, we all issued World War I sailor's pea coat. But yet, since they were sailors, they're all adult size. So when I wore the pea coat, it looked like the jacket was walking.
We welcomed the snow because in San Francisco it doesn't snow. And so making that first snowman was fun. Having snowball fight was extremely fun.
I always like to have snow fights, but one thing I didn't like was when we had to go to school and there's a blizzard, so it's almost parallel to the ground, the snow coming and hitting us on our face. So we had to walk backwards to school.
I remember later on having to buy winter clothes, you know, warmer clothes and ice skates for ice skating.
It was extremely cold and the blizzards were terrible.
The life of the internees was quite different from the idealized photographs released by the American government.
What I remember walking into the camp at Heart Mountain in the room, it was much like as shown here. Although when I walked in here, I thought the room was bigger than I remember when my mother and my sister and I shared the room.
The barracks weren't completely finished. The insides of the finished barracks had what they call Celotex over the studs that kind of insulated you from the weather. And in some cases, the Celotex on the ceiling were not placed yet, and they were eventually placed in there, gave you a little more privacy. You could hear things going on in the next room fairly easily.
We had the GI cots, the Army cots, and the mattresses and the olive drab U.S. Army blankets.
But my mother, being a pre-med student, was so conscious about cleanliness. She washed the Army blanket so often that it was so thin that it was cold even in their barracks. And so on a cold winter morning or after sleeping, all you have to do is just go, and you could see steam coming out, and that's how cold it was.
Well, the barracks were, well, they were cut into about 3 or 4 sections for each family, and they were sort of small, just barely adequate.
Barracks were tar-papered barracks and segmented into several little rooms, and our room was, I think, 20 by 25 feet. There were 6 of us living there. And I can't remember how it was partitioned at all because he didn't have material to partition off rooms. And there was a pot-belly coal-burning stove at one end, and yeah, I can't remember exactly how we all fit in there, but there were 6 of us in that room.
I have 3 sisters and a brother, but we also had another girl come live with us because her mother got sick, her father had passed away, and this lady asked my mom to take her child with us. So we were 6 of us all in one room. My mom and dad had a separate room. So it was just different, you know, and for us to get used to living that way.
There were 7 of us in the family, and we had one room in the barrack. And, you know, that was little, it was a larger room than what we had in Santa Anita. In Santa Anita, we had 2 smaller rooms because of the size of the family of 7 people.
By this time, we were used to living in this style, and things were a little bit better, I believe, in Heart Mountain than in Pomona.
My father was gone, of course, and so there were neighbors who helped my mother build a little kitchen table out of scrap wood.
I think he built sort of like a jewelry box or something with a Heart Mountain shaped box top. It's shaped like that, and then a small drawer, a jewelry box for my mother, I believe.
There was some leftover lumber that was from the barracks, and the administration told us that we could take some if we would like to, and my husband took it and made a little dressing table for me. We covered the inside so that the cold wind wouldn't come into the barracks. We covered the floors and the walls.
My brother, I remember, helped us make some furniture, you know, chairs and tables.
What was available was the wood. Now, those that weren't talented in carpentry will use an orange box or something to make seats out of.
Well, my dad was a pretty good little furniture maker. So I think he did make little chairs and things like that from scrap lumber that was around the camp.
There was a man killed. He was looking for wood to carve, and the guard shot him and killed him. He was inside the fence too.
Heart Mountain was a desolate spot, situated between the tiny hamlets of Cody and Powell, 2 towns that had a combined population of little more than 3,000.
The people in Cody, they had night watchmen watching their town, because with 2,000 or 3,000 population opposed to 11,000, they were really afraid of us with only 12 miles distance. And they thought that we were going to attack them. Well, we had no ambition of going over there, taking over a town.
Yes, the guards all had guns, and they were pointing at us. The reason I say that is because a number of people said the guards were protecting us. If they were doing that, the gun should have been pointing outwardly, not inwardly.
Well, we were in Block 27 where the guards were right there, so it was scary. That part was scary.
I mean, we became instant POWs. We got captured by the GIs. The presidents, politicians, the media, use the term concentration camp.
You know, we weren't tattooed, but I think it was tattooed in our brain.
In Heart Mountain, we were fairly close to the gate, the fencing, and I saw the guard towers, but kind of got used to the whole experience.
I remember at Christmas, some of the children went and serenaded them with Christmas carols, and they became very friendly, so they had to bring in a new set of guards, and they told them strictly no talking with the people in there.
There were guards. I think there's, half a dozen guard towers on the circumference of the camp, but I believe after the first year or so, we never saw the guards again.
After a period of time, they realized that we're not going to escape. Where are we going to go? You know, it's a long ways to the Pacific Ocean, and even if we went to San Francisco, where are we going to stay?
More than 100 miles from any city of substance, the camp was going to have to be self-sufficient. Despite the Cowboy State's scant 3-month growing season, the prisoners managed to grow more than 1,000 tons of produce in the first year, including melons, peas, beans, cabbages, and daikon radish, much of which they stored in an enormous root cellar for use during the long, harsh winter. Now the third largest town in Wyoming, Heart Mountain had everything from a movie theater to a dry cleaner.
We had the police force, we had the fire engine, we had a fire department, we had a block manager, the doctors, the hospital, the library, a small library, churches. But probably the most people went to was the Buddhist church. They even had Catholic, and I don't think there was any dissension. It was only on Sundays.
Eventually, internees were given day passes to work on neighboring farms, to sell produce, or to shop in Cody or Powell.
We went into the city of Cody, and that's where we used to sometimes buy things.
Alberta Cassian, who was my 8th grade teacher in camp, she took a group of kids to Cody, and she was so embarrassed to see a sign that says, "No dogs or Japs allowed." It didn't take long before the people, the business people of Cody or Powell or any other city, because that little green paper, money, they welcomed that. And so pretty soon, when at first they were afraid of us, they welcomed us with open hands. They said, "Come on, buy whatever you like," and that's typical of any business.
My mother worked, and workers received $16 a month, and the professionals like doctors and such got $19 a month. So you had to accumulate and save, and
But there wasn't that much money, because I remember having to wear hand-me-downs.
But we try to be neat, and well, that's the best we could do.
As a young boy, oh my gosh, we wanted a glove with rabbit fur inside, and they kept on saying, "Well, mittens are warmer because your hands are together," but that didn't look masculine, so we preferred the regular glove.
They gave each family catalogs from Montgomery Ward and Sears, and I believe Spiegel, and we ordered clothes from that.
I think that's how we got all our clothes,
Everybody was wearing the same kind of clothes.
Even the presence of armed guards did not dissuade the children from doing what children do.
First of all, when we got there, finally in camp, you see other kids. So it was a lot different than every day now you're with a bunch of kids and I got new friends. So for me, as my age, it was, I guess it was, I shouldn't say wonderful, but I mean, it was nice to be in camp where it was hardship for my folks and the older, But for myself, I thought it was great.
At the very beginning, where most of the people that did their wash their clothes, they had sinks. and they had a lot of people, the children will be crying and so forth. But on the other half of that room was like a community center. And the older kids would teach us all types of different games. The dumbest game I ever saw was we all held our hands and one person will stick a knife into the electric socket and the person on the end will get the biggest jolt.
Well, some of the fun stuff that we did in Heart Mountain, of course, they did build a swimming pool for us. We did that.
I've got pictures of the swimming hole, yes. I was in Girl Scouts, so we camped out there.
There was a fellow by the name of Queenie Sheba who was the best and fastest swimmer in camp. And every time he went swimming, everybody would stare at this guy because he was so good. He looked like an Olympic star. But we noticed the people from Hawaii, they had their ukuleles and they would sing. And they would sing the Hawaiian war chant and they would sing a variety of a song like Manuali Boy, which you ask a Hawaiian now, they never heard of it.
One morning, a group of us decided to go on a rabbit hunt. And there was one older person, he was about 14, I guess. He was sort of very bossy, and he says, okay, we're going on a rabbit hunt. So about 9 of us, I remember, went a little bit north of Block 9, and we made a line, and he says, we're going to all go very quietly and trying to corral the rabbit out there. But as soon as we saw a rabbit, we all ran, and we chased the rabbit until we got to the fence of the camp. And the rabbit just sort of looked back at us, and then he just snuck right underneath the fence. And we were all sort of frustrated because the barbed wire fence was there. And so as we stood there, a very interesting thing happened. It was right near the edge of the camp, and the road was there, and a little car came up. It was with a rumble seat, and there were two white boys in the front and one boy in the rumble seat in the back. And they stopped and they started yelling, "Oh, you dumb Japs," and everything, you know. And then they started throwing rocks at us, and we were I can't understand why, but we just stood next to the fence, and they started pelting us with rocks, and we didn't fight back or anything. You know, ordinarily you would think we would have gotten mad and thrown rocks back at them, but no, we just stood there.
There was a lot of scrap lumber around, and we made sleds. And of course, there was no hills right in the camp area, so one time there was a place not far from our block where we went, and the hill was not covered completely with snow, but with the snow, what snow there was and the gravels and the dirt, we were able to go down the hill. And after a couple of runs, my sled caught some rocks underneath where I had the steel runners. And while we were there, this military police vehicles came by, and we had to get on their things, leave our sleds there, and they took us away somewhere, I don't know where, but eventually we were told that we were out of bounds. And I thought, out of bounds, where's the out of bounds? We were released that same day, but the next day I walked along by the road by our barrack, which was on the northern edge. There's a dirt road, and I looked on the other side of the dirt road, and there were little stakes with a piece of red cloth on it, and I guess we weren't supposed to pass that. We left our sleds there, and we wanted them back, so we kind of walked through another block, and then all of a sudden we looked around, and then we went running out there, ran down the hill, grabbed our sleds, and we came back with our sleds again.
Our camp, Block 9, had a movie theater. We used to go see Buck Rogers
I've contacted Miss Buck's voice.
Hello, Chandro. Is that Lieutenant Rogers speaking?
Buck Rogers to you, Professor. Hello, Dad. We're having a swell time.
Are you all right, Buck? Where are you?
There was a whole series every Saturday morning. Buck Rogers would be on, and so we used to enjoy that. And I think it cost us a nickel each.
It's really typical of any movie that I remember. I used to go in San Francisco. I used to go to the Harding Theater, and when the cartoons came on, everybody screamed and hollered and yelled. When we were in camp, we did the same thing. We hollered and yelled because it was so entertaining. But the nice thing about it was we knew exactly what was happening with the European war conflict and the Asian Pacific, because we knew how the war was going. And as time went on, we knew that it was a matter of time that Germans were going to surrender, and also that Japan was going to eventually surrender.
High school was the core, the center of all our activity. And, you know, we made dear friends there. And we had school dances. They were big. They had plays.
Hart Mountain even had its own sports teams: baseball, basketball, and football.
I remember a game with Red Lodge, 63-0.
It was so exciting to see all these, I hate to say a cliche, these great big white guys. I mean, humongous ball players. And the Japanese ball players are extremely small, but talented and fast.
So they would travel over 100 miles to get to our school. And I'm sure the parents worried about the safety of the travel and going to concentration camp. Well, basically a prison. And then they would get whipped by these enemy people, you know? I was wondering, I wonder how they feel.
I read a book, Baseball Saved Us in Camp, but to me, Boy Scouts saved us in camp because we were able to meet boys and girls from other blocks and throughout the camp, different age level, younger ones, older ones, whereas in school you just meet your classmates. So it was really exciting to be in the Boy Scouts, and it kept us busy. We had a patrol meeting every week, we had troop meeting every week, and then in between we had troop camping or hiking. So it was really exciting.
Yes, I was in Troop 333 with Dono Yamamoto and George Fujikawa and Bill Shishima and Kaz Shiroyama.
You know, the Boy Scout organization throughout the Japanese community, they were all sponsored by either the church or the cultural centers because it's not book learning, it's learning that you get other than in school, such as leadership, camping, hiking, camaraderie.
My camp experience is based around scouting and the troop activities. Those were the highlights of my stay at Hart Mountain. They had little ruffian groups out there that I was running around with before I joined the Boy Scouts. And if the Boy Scouts weren't there, I probably would have continued messing around with these little delinquents from Los Angeles.
The Issei, the first generation, was very concerned that it was kind of difficult to instill the traditional Japanese values. And character traits were very important to them. That's why they liked the Boy Scouts so much.
There were a total of about 7 Boy Scout troops in camp, and we were scheduled to go once in early July, but it was delayed because one of the boys in our troop had drowned in the canal.
In camp, one of our Boy Scout members, Toru Shibata, him and his younger brother and I believe another friend went to the local irrigation canal. And there's different stories I heard, but I heard that they challenged him to swim across the canal. He said, oh, I could do that. But when he jumped in, the canal was cold and swift, and then he didn't make it. So his brother had to view all of that. So it was really heartbreaking. And then after we heard the news, they lowered the level of the canal, and so the scouts had to go in the canal and walk it hand in hand across the canal. And one of our scout buddies, Kenny Yoshikura, we noticed he stepped on Toru Shibata because he ran out of the canal yelling, so we knew he found him. And it's really heartbreaking because he was the life of the party type of boy. He's always cheerful, always with a smile, always joking. 2 weeks before he drowned, he asked our scoutmaster, Mr. Seb Fujise, he said, Mr. Fujise, if you die, do you go to heaven? And like a true scout leader and father, Mr. Fujise said, yes, all good scouts go to heaven. And that really shook me up because I recall him asking our scoutmaster that about 2 weeks prior to his drowning. So I thought, wow, maybe he had some kind of premonition.
The children of Heart Mountain were becoming accustomed to the wilds of Wyoming and more daring by the day.
We became known as the slingshot block. And you know, Wyoming is known for a lot of hunting. So we went down to the Shoshone River. We could see hundreds of magpie nests. And one boy said, I bet you cannot hit that nest. Why we select that one? So we all started shooting. And many of us had marbles as well as ammunition because when we played for keeps, we had extra marbles. And the perfect bullets. And eventually we could see the magpie nest hit the ground. It's pretty high up. It rolled down on the ground and stopped. Well, we were curious as to know what in the world, what does a magpie nest look like inside? So we went up there, we looked at it, and this little baby magpie bird begging for food with his mouth wide open. And one of the little older boys said, you know, that bird's going to die. I said, why? He says, the mother bird will reject that bird because it's on the ground. They can't bring it up to a nest. So at that moment, I says, that bird is going to live with me. We walked back to camp, and here were the barbed wire fence. Each one of us opened it up for each other, and I held the bird, and I crawled back into Heart Mountain. So the symbolism of this bird was that bird became an internee.
I didn't know at that time it was shigs because we used to go to go to the Shoshone River. I had to go through that block, and I saw this bird. So every time we went out to Shoshone River, we'd go by that way to the bird.
I would say, hello, Maggie. And one day that bird said, hello, Maggie. I said, oh, no. Is there somebody around? Is somebody playing tricks on me? So I went to the bird. We're face to face with each other. And I said, hello, Maggie. And the bird said, hello, Maggie. So I went and told my friends, you're a big liar. Well, come and see for yourself. Well, the bird said, hello, Maggie. Next thing you know, the word got out. The whole camp knew that there was one bird that could talk. So people would come visit, whether it was young, old, or regardless of the age. It was fascinating. Well, what else is there to do? You know. Next thing you know, the birds start using other words like "Come on, Maggie," "What you doing?" "Baka," which means stupid in Japanese. Ohio means good morning, so it would say Ohio. My mother used to observe was a pretty girl be walking by and it would make a beautiful woof call. And the girl would turn around, look around to see what guy is calling. Well, it's the bird. Can't see the bird in the cage.
Maggie was selected to be an internee by fate, but there was a different type of selection and fate awaiting the young men of Heart Mountain. Just as in other all-American towns, they would be asked to serve their country, even though the draft effort would take place from behind barbed wire.
The soldiers that were in the Army prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, some of them were, shall we say, booted out of the service, and others were able to remain in the service. Sergeant Ben Kuroki, he was from Nebraska, so maybe he was one of the few exceptions, especially he was in the Air Force. At that time, they were not able to go into the Air Force, but he was in the Air Force. When he came into Heart Mountain Camp to recruit, there was mixed emotion, I heard. I was probably around 13 or 14 when he came into camp, and to me, he was a hero, but yet other people felt, gee, he never went into camp. Why should he come and recruit people of Japanese ancestry to fight for America behind barbed wire fence and armed guards? So we had two different ideas about Sergeant Ben Kuroki coming into camp and recruiting for Uncle Sam.
Boy, oh boy, you are lucky good dog. Wish I got packages like that.
You and me both.
You send package.
Yeah, hand me those cans, will you?
What you gonna send? Brother in the Army in Pacific?
Family in a relocation camp in Arizona. Arizona, USA. You think that chow here is bad, brother.
You can even get soap?
Oh, sure. They've got a canteen loaded with stuff. Anything you want if you can get there before they're sold out. Yes, sir. All the comforts of home. And only one block from the barracks to the toilets and showers.
Barracks? Everybody all thrown together?
Got partitions, separate room for each family. My folks are lucky. Only 5 of them since I left.
Treat you like that? Hard to figure why a guy volunteered for the Army.
Those who refused to serve went from behind barbed wire to behind bars.
My oldest brother's first name is James. He had joined the group known as a Fair Play Committee and resist being inducted into the service. They were tried at a court in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and found guilty of resisting the draft. And he spent 2 years in the federal penitentiary in Steilacoom, Washington. And at the end of the war, President Truman declared them exonerated, and so they had no record of that violation.
May of 1945 saw the lights go on again. Once more the nation's capital was blazing in all its glory, and in cities throughout the nation the blackout was ended. Germany had surrendered, the war in Europe was over. There was still a war to be fought to a finish in the Pacific, but that couldn't dim the celebration that marked the fall of Hitler and the end of his dreams of world conquest. Three months later, crowds gather in front of the White House, awaiting the announcement of Japan's surrender from President Harry S. Truman. It took 2 atomic bombs to bring Japan to her knees. But now Pearl Harbor was avenged, and the news triggered the greatest celebration the nation has ever known.
It was August the 14th, 1945. It was a windy day, and we were playing basketball outside on Block 7. And we heard the siren go off for the first time at Heart Mountain. Not just once, but maybe for half an hour. And so we said, the war ended, assuming that's what the sermon was about. We laid on the ground, tears in our eyes, laughing. Now we get to go home. And it was so windy. There was a little whirlwind. It looked like a little miniature tornado. And we could look up. And of course, our hair was full of dirt or sand. We didn't care. We were that happy.
You know, it was a case of here's $25 and a free train ticket. Goodbye.
We were of the group that had no destination and no money. So the government set up temporary camps in several parts of Los Angeles. One was the Lomita Airstrip, Army Airstrip, which is now Torrance Airport, and there we were sent. And there was a government office there to try to rehabilitate us back into society.
My dad went out from the camps and they found these trailer camps to put people in, so they had somewhere to move to. And I remember first we moved to Santa Monica, and I don't remember what kind of home we lived in there. And then once the trailer courts were set up, then we moved into the trailer court.
When we got out of camp, we got on a train, we went to Oakland, we got on a bus, we went to Hunters Point in San Francisco, and the bus driver got off, and I didn't know whether we were going to stay there or not. But then he came back in and he drove us to the west side of San Francisco. There was a old abandoned army camp, Fort Funston, which was had empty barracks there, so we stayed there. We couldn't go to San Jose because there was we didn't have any place to go to.
Well, we went, my brother was working for the railroad in Spokane, so we went to Spokane, Washington. We stayed there just not even a year. And then from there, they wanted to go back to California, so we went to San Francisco, and we stayed at the Hunters Point shipyard for about 6 months. And then the government found us a place to work, my folks to work. So we went to call Fremont now, but it's called, at that time, was Centerville.
Okay, since my parents couldn't find a living place for us, we had to go do a schoolboy job. That I had to work for my room and board. I worked on a rabbit farm, so my job was to feed and clean the rabbit droppings every morning, then after school do the same thing again for my room and board. And my brother found a place in Silver Lake District, which at that time was sort of a middle upper class community. So he went to school at Marshall High School, and for his room and board, he had to mow the lawn, wash the dishes, and do household chores.
My dad's friend was a mortician, and he wanted to go back to California and restart his mortician business. And so he turned his job over to my father, and he was one of the very fortunate people who had a lead for a job.
Yes, we were lucky that we had the farm to go to, although by the time my brother came back from his time in a federal prison, and he and I worked on the farm it took us about 10 years for that farm to be productive enough to support us, to reach the level that we had before the war. So it took us 10 years to recover.
We got off the train with our few luggage, maybe 3 or 4 suitcases, and he took us to our little shack, which was our pre-war home. Had no indoor plumbing, had only a single cold water tap, and apparently it had been used during the war by some farm laborers. But I mean, in reality, we came back to almost a poorer condition than the camp, which had hot and cold running water.
The camp started to become like a ghost town. And the mess hall started to close, consolidating. Where at one time there was 60 mess halls, now it's 20, now less than that, you know. Now we had all the privacy we wanted in the shower room or the bathroom. But it was very lonely. So now, October, the first time I saw Maggie on the bottom of the cage, eyes flickering, and I carried the bird on my chest, and I could hear my mother behind me crying. But I was determined that bird is going to get well. And I put the bird in a little shoebox, placed it under my bed, and got up early next morning, and she was hard as a rock. So I buried the bird, put a cross up. Maggie did not want to leave Heart Mountain, did not want to leave Wyoming. And Maggie felt that she kept all the internees' spirits up by entertaining to us, by her speaking ability, being close, and being associated with all of us.
Heart Mountain closed on November 10th, 1945, and the internees resumed what was left of their lives with a surprising lack of bitterness.
Well, why should I be bitter? You know, I like who I am, and that experience of the camps made me who I am. So I am not bitter, but I know that there were some terrible things done to us, but I'm not bitter.
Because my father lost the farm and all the equipment, so I'm sure he was heartbroken. But they never discussed this with us. And so even after we left camp,
You know, I don't think I'm angry. I think I'm more upset because I feel like I'm insecure. I wish I could be more outgoing. I think in that way, it's upsetting.
It was an experience that made me mentally tough. I learned to gambaru and also gaman. Gaman is to endure pain and discomfort, ability to postpone your desires.
I remember whenever I heard the word Jap, I would just kind of go a little nuts and crazy, you know, and I'll start swinging first and asking questions later. And it took me a long time to get over that. It took me a long time to get over the anger.
I don't think I was ever bitter in that. One of the things we had things to do when we got out of camp, all right? I had to get an education. My brother had to keep the farm going, and we all had a lot of things to keep going and not wallowing in our self-pity or whatever you want to call it. I remember just going back to work and trying to get an education and doing a lot of extra stuff to support ourselves.
No, I don't feel bitter. It was just something we had to go through. So I didn't,
So the Japanese word shikata ga nai, that couldn't be helped. Or they always say, they use the word gaman. Gaman means to endure or put up with. So that's what we had to do.
Oh, right now they would rebel, probably. they would be angry because it's the third and fourth generation Sansei and Yonsei who have really been outspoken about the injustice of the evacuation. Yeah.
It's very important for the Yonsei to know this, is because the biggest thing is just knowing your history, not letting it happen again. Don't let it get buried somewhere and for the mistake to happen. It's important in our history, not just as being Japanese American, but as American as a whole.
You don't want it lost because you don't want it to happen again. This being United States of America, you would suspect it couldn't happen here, yet it does. So, or yet it did, and I think it's important that we don't lose our roots and our heritage. These are all the kind of things that makes the country stronger. And if we lost it, I think you'd move towards that vanilla people.
No, you never heard anything about the camps in school. I think during probably the 70s, when you started having the Asian American movements, it became curriculum at college level. And at what point it became, down to the elementary school, I'm not really sure. I'm sure that's probably more recent.
It's never happened before or since, but to be in a concentration camp is a very special event in American history, and the kids, the fourth generation, should know something about it. If you write it, it's unlikely that they will read the book or whatever, but if it's DVD, I think the chance that they will see it will be much better, and they'll have some kind of appreciation for that experience.
I think they should know, because this shouldn't happen to anyone anywhere again. Just because we look like the enemy, we're incarcerated, there's no charges against us, no due process of law.
Well, I think they ought to know that bad things could happen, and there could be a lot of injustices.
Whether Japanese, Muslim, whatever, it shouldn't happen to anybody else.
Whenever something like this occurs, there tends to be a huge uproar, and I think something like this would not be tolerated. In fact, I don't think people would go to camp now. I think everyone would become dissidents.
Never happen. I do not believe. The younger generation, our children, there'd be no way that they would go. So.
I think there would be a huge uprising.
I don't really remember that much about Roy, I was never boy crazy. I always liked to play with the boys, but we played games and baseball and whatever. So I was I was not. I guess I was more immature, young, whatever you want to call it. But I then met Roy later on in life, and it was love at first sight, so what can I say?
Well, we actually, the first time I saw her was in Las Vegas at a reunion of our Heart Mountain class. And she was widowed and I was separated, and after 45 years I had a crush on her in the 8th grade in Heart Mountain. But we had lived separate lives for 45 years, but we finally met again. And so after a very brief romance again, we got married in Reno. The two of us snuck away.
Well, we picked February 14th, so Roy will never forget the date. And then we went to buy a lot of penny Valentine cards, and that's how we announced our marriage to everyone.
And in Reno, on Valentine's Day, they stay open from midnight to 1 a.m. so that people want to get married on Valentine's Day, they had a chance. So Joan and I were the first ones in line. There were a bunch of young kids behind us, but we were the first to get married that day on Valentine's Day in 1992.
Well, I climbed up one of these walls. I don't know how I did it. There was a staircase up here, right over there, that main building. I think I went up the staircase and climbed into the window of one of the executive rooms and walked in, and it was all dark, and I found a private bathroom, and inside the enclosed area there of the bathroom was this big container, which I was telling Garrett, with these big thin sheets of whatever it was. I didn't know what it was.
Paper.
Years later, I found out that it was the gaskets that you put on the toilet seat before you sit down. And at 12 years of age, it was the first time I saw that in the toilet. I was wondering, what the heck is this doing in the toilet, in the bathroom, in the toilet stall there in the executive bathroom.
So my school friends were all Japanese Americans, but my home friend were all Hispanic or Mexicans. But I did miss my Hispanic friends back home and going to downtown Broadway and the movies.
When I first saw Seabiscuit, I was 12 years old, walking by here, and I tried to climb on top of the horse and couldn't quite make it. There was nothing to grab onto. Made a few attempts and then came back down. I still remember that. Yeah, at 12 years of age, I think my head came right up to the spine right up there.
We talked about that delicious hamburger, the hot dog, the milkshake, the banana split that we couldn't get at Heart Mountain. And we would compare the cities and the other kids that came from other towns, and ours is better than theirs and theirs is better than ours. And so that's the thing that we talked about most. That's the thing that we cherish.